Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
President Assad has left Syria, bringing an end to more than half a century of his family's rule.
The collapse of the Assad regime, the tyranny in Damascus, offers great opportunity, but also is fraught with significant danger.
We have to see this as an opportunity for the future of Syria. That's a future without the terrorism and violence we've seen far too much of in this brutal regime.
It's a moment of historic opportunity for the long-suffering people of Syria to build a better future for their proud country. It's also a moment of risk and uncertainty.
But with Assad gone, Russia has lost a key ally and potentially key air and naval bases crucial for its operations in Africa.
The absolute priority for us is the safety of all Russian citizens located on the territory of the Syrian state, as well as the inviolability of Russian facilities and missions, diplomatic, military, and others.
On today's episode of the Next Africa podcast, we'll ask whether Russia still has the ability to project influence on Africa and how regimes dependent on Russia for support are planning for the future. I'm Jennifer Zabasajja, and this is the Next Africa podcast, bringing you one story each week from the continent, driving the future of global growth with the context only Bloomberg can provide. So joining us to discuss how Russia's operations in Africa could be under threat are our Bloomberg reporters, Simon Marks, who is in Nairobi, and Katarina Hoije in Dakar. Hi, both. Hi to you both. Thank you for joining. How's it going?
Hi, Jen. Thanks for having us.
Let's just start on, essentially what we do know when it comes to the situation in Syria. The world is still trying to work out the knowns and the unknowns. But why is losing the Middle Eastern ally so important to Russia when it comes to its relations and its connections to the African continent? Make that connection for us, if you can, Simon.
Syria is a real linchpin in Russia's ability to send supplies, including weapons and fuel and other exports, to countries where it has a presence in Africa. In recent years, we've obviously seen Russia through the use of the mercenary outfit Wagner, and then since its leader died in a plane crash last year, the Russian Defense Ministry have been really making moves to spread their geopolitical influence in Africa, particularly in the Sahel, but also in the Central African Republic and Sudan. And they need an airbase and a port in Syria as an air bridge to these countries. Should these locations be unavailable to them, that air bridge just falls to pieces, and so does their ability to have influence, quite simply, in Africa.
What sort of influence, though, are we talking about? Is it physical bodies, getting people on the ground? Is it supplies? I mean, what exactly was the key point and the importance for this region?
So it's all of the above. Both the Hamaimim airbase as well as a port in Tartus have been used to bring in fuel primarily and weapons, but then also to send soldiers and mercenaries to the countries where Russia has a role in supporting the government there. The issue is that Syria is close enough for Russian cargo planes to make a stop, refuel, on board whatever it might be, soldiers or supplies, military supplies, and then send them onwards to places such as Bangui or Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso.
And you both make the point in your story about the mileage and really how far it is getting supplies all the way from Russia to Africa. Katarina, if that airbase, if that area is not an option for them, what else potentially is a way around that, if there is anything else?
Well, I mean, one option that's being mentioned by Russia's partners in Africa is using Turkey as a base. Another one is Libya, but then, I mean, it's still, you don't have that, which would be an option if Turkey allowed Russian military cargo flights through its airspace. Then they could reach Libya fully loaded. This has happened on rare occasions in the past, but it's still something that Russia would have to negotiate. Other options that has been mentioned is using Algeria or even Egypt as sort of a transit point into the countries where they keep troops, which is basically Mali, where they have about 1,000 Kremlin-linked Wagner forces on the ground, but also Niger, Burkina Faso, and Central African Republic, as Simon mentioned. Another way would be a land option, but that would not really work when it comes to troop rotations and getting supplies into the ground. Another option is Sudan, Port Sudan, where Russia has been negotiating for access.
Russia has been lobbying the army in Sudan for many years now, actually, to build a military base on the Red Sea. But it has proved quite arduous for them to succeed. Iran is also pushing, but there's a lot of opposition to this from the likes of the US, who clearly do not want to see Moscow have a substantial military base on the Red Sea and gain even more influence in Africa than they already have. Sudan so far has taken somewhat of a back step and not made that deal with Russia. They're quite aware of the geopolitics and don't want to cause too much controversy at the moment.
And is it safe to say that we've seen Russia's influence on the continent waning a bit? I mean, I wonder how this situation, if we try to piece together where Russia is in terms of its influence on the continent and how this could affect that. Simon, what would you say? How would you describe it?
I think in the last 5 to 10 years, Russia has really stepped up its attempt to gain relevance geopolitically and also economically throughout Africa. And we've seen them put a lot of pressure through disinformation campaigns, but also through cutting bilateral deals with governments where a whole host of military coups have taken place in recent years. And as a result of that, we've seen a waning in the ability of more sort of legacy partners, colonial era partners like France, to keep their troops and keep their business operations flowing in the same way. And likewise, the US have also scaled back the number of troops fighting Islamist groups on the continent. So it's looking pretty good, really, for Russia, I would say, in Africa. But I think Katarina, for sure, can elaborate on the Sahel.
Yeah, I mean, speaking to leaders here, they seem convinced that, the partnership with Russia is going to be sustained, even though the recent events in Syria, and that Russia would try to find other military bases elsewhere if it loses access to Syria. I mean, that said, the questions has been raised on social media and also among populations in the 3 Sahel states, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, as in what if the same scenario reproduces here? What if there's maybe not an attack on the capital or rebels taking the country, but we have seen attacks in Mali's capital recently. There's been big attacks in Ouagadougou. What if that happens and Russia doesn't have this access? Would they actually step in and help these leaders? I mean, we just saw them sort of dropping Assad in Syria. What would actually be their reaction to a similar scenario in Africa?
Stick with us, Simon and Katarina. When we come back, we're going to talk more about how the countries dependent on Russia have reacted and what could potentially come next. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Today on the podcast, we're digging into Russia's relationship with Africa as it loses a key ally and potentially a key air bridge with the fall of Assad in Syria. We have Bloomberg's Simon Marks and Katarina Hoije with us now. Katarina, you were just speaking about the reaction that you're getting from people and leaders in the Sahel. I mean, generally, is there concern amongst most of the region about what this could potentially mean?
I mean, I think the majority still feels that, that Russia is a reliable partner, especially after having cut ties with their Western allies and going towards the sovereignty project that these states are on. That said, I mean, again, recent events in Mali and Burkina Faso where Russia hasn't stepped in, and also most recently now in Syria, does have people questioning the efficiency of their presence on the ground in actually fighting the Islamist insurgents or the rebels that have been threatening these 3 countries. I think we're also seeing it in the level of the states where all of these three countries have sought other partnerships. I mean, Mali actually has a Turkish private company training their soldiers on the ground. Niger and Burkina Faso are using drones from Turkey and China. And in Central African Republic, they have turned to a US private military company, Bancroft. So there's definitely some sort of trying to diversify their relations to not fully rely on Russia, which still remains a very trusted partner, the main partner in security operations from outside the continent.
Is there one of these countries that perhaps needs Russia more than the others? And I think about some of them that are landlocked. I mean, are they more reliant on a partner like Russia being there on the ground? Simon?
Well, you mentioned obviously landlocked countries, and the Central African Republic fits that bill exactly. You know, it's an isolated country which, in order for the president to hold on to power there and resist armed groups, a coalition of rebel groups in the country, they have been very dependent on Wagner Group. But also they have a military deal with the Kremlin, which also plays a role in the country. And in Libya, they use one of 4 air bases there. It's called the Brak al-Shati air base, where they send personnel and military supplies in from. And in order to get stuff to this air base, they need Syria, quite simply. This air base is too far from Russia, from anywhere in Russia, to reach in one cargo flight. So losing these Syrian operations, they would be forced to reroute, quite simply. And Katarina mentioned it earlier, one way that they could potentially do that is via the UAE. But it's far from clear if indeed they could do that.
Is it too early to tell really how the fallout will be across the region based on the sources that you both were speaking to for this story? Do they have a clear indication of where things are headed to next?
If Russia's not able to sort of keep up the link with Syria, needs to find another option. I mean, it could definitely impact, troop rotations, the abilities to get supplies into the forces in these countries, and obviously then you can't maintain troops for that long. The people we're speaking to don't think that it's not going to be an immediate pullout, but obviously if they have to rethink their operations because they become more costly or take more time, maybe they would cut countries like Niger or Burkina Faso, where they already have a limited presence. In terms of the impact on the countries, and especially in the Sahel states, I mean, Mali, who does rely on the assistance of Wagner to fight Islamist insurgencies and the rebel groups that they've been trying to push back in the north, they would definitely have an impact, less so in Burkina Faso and Niger.
All these countries where Russia's present are inherently extremely fragile states, and while on the outset, looking at it frontally, it seems like, there are entrenched military juntas in a lot of these countries now. They are nonetheless very vulnerable to outside uprisings, both from the public and also from well-equipped rebel armies, and instability from neighboring countries, as Chad and Sudan are a fine example for the case of Central African Republic. So it's very possible that you could see some shifts in who controls where in the coming 12 months.
And you can read all of our coverage on the rapidly evolving situation in Syria across Bloomberg platforms now. Here's some other stories we've been following across the region this week. Ethiopia and Somalia agreed to lower tensions over a deal that would allow Addis Ababa to build a military base on the coast of the breakaway region of Somaliland in exchange for a stake in its national airline. The two countries have agreed to forego and leave behind differences and contentious issues and forge ahead and start technical negotiations to resolve disputes with Turkey's help no later than the end of February of 2025, a joint declaration said. Also, Ghana's economic growth accelerated in the third quarter to the fastest pace in almost 5 years after solid gains in the industrial sector. The data follows the election victory of John Mahama, who ran a campaign focused on economic stability and debt relief. And on debt relief, the IMF says it's open to renegotiating Ghana's financing program, something Mahama campaigned on if the economic objectives of the reform plans are realized. You can follow these stories across Bloomberg, including the Next Africa newsletter. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. This program was produced by Adrian Bradley. Don't forget to follow and review this show wherever you usually get your podcasts. I'm Jennifer Zabasajja. Thanks for listening.